in a designated spot, the priest kept loaves of bread for God. A lot of ancient peoples did that same thing. They offered bread to their gods as a holy food. And once a week in ancient Israel, the priest made bread according to very specific instruction. And they left 12 loaves of it on a solid gold table in front of God's glory. Hundreds of years later, when King Solomon constructed that beautiful temple in Jerusalem, the priests were still putting those 12 loaves of bread on a table of pure gold as an offering for the Lord. They did that because, according to the law that Moses had passed down to the people of Israel, this bread, this holy bread, known as the bread of presence of God. This holy bread was always supposed to be there on that table as an offering to God. So bread, the staff of life, was made as a holy offering to the God of life. Makes sense, right? My favorite chapter in John's Gospel is chapter 6. I love John chapter 6. If you haven't read it in a while, go home and read it this afternoon. That's where all the action is. John chapter 6. Pretty sure I could preach from that chapter of John for an entire year and still have a whole lot left to say about it. All four gospel accounts tell the story about Jesus feeding 5,000 people with those 5 little loaves of bread and 2 fish. We've talked about that story before, remember? We learned that the loaves were like a little sandwich loaf. And the fish was the size of something you would poke into a sandwich, like a sardine or something. All four Gospels tell that story. In the Gospel of John, guess where it is? Chapter 6. It's in chapter 6. And John tells us that after Jesus filled all those hungry bellies with food, he went off by himself. Now, it kind of seemed to the crowd that he had disappeared because they couldn't find him where they thought that he should be. So they went to look for him. And when they located him, they asked him, "How is it that you got to this particular place?" And all Jesus said was, "You've come looking for me because yesterday I filled your stomach with bread that doesn't last. You'd be far better off if you asked me for the bread that endures, the kind of bread that feeds your life and fills your soul." And the crowd said to Jesus, "Sir, always give us that bread." I love that. I love that. The crowd said to Jesus, "Sir, always give us that bread." Oh, how we hunger for that bread, don't we? All of humanity hungers for that bread that feeds our lives and fills our soul. We may express that hunger, that deep need in a variety of different ways. But you are never going to convince me. It doesn't matter how smart you are, how much you know, how very eloquent you can speak on the subject. You are never going to convince me that we don't, all of us, hunger for our lives to be fed and our souls to be filled. The crowd said to Jesus, "Sir, always give us that bread." And Jesus said to them, "I am that bread." am the bread of life. This summer, my daughter took me to a bakery full of bread. We couldn't eat any of it, you understand. And when you can't get the bread you want, you suddenly realize how important it is to you, how much you need it, how much you hunger for it, how desperate you are to consume it. Sir, always give us that bread, the crowd said to Jesus. And Jesus replied to the crowd, I am that bread. I am the bread of life. He identified himself with the sustenance for living, for living a very full and a very abundant life, which is the definition of eternal life, you understand. Gail O'Day says our religious needs and our human longings are met in Christ. William Barclay says in his commentary on the Gospel of John, the hunger of the human situation is ended when we know Christ and through him we know God. The hunger of our human situation is ended when we know Christ and through him we know God. In the teachings of Jesus and in his revelation to humanity of God, we find the nutrients of full, of abundant, of eternal life. He offers the food. He is the food by which we live our lives, by which our lives are fed and our souls are filled. But this week, as I thought about this passage that I dearly love, and as I heard Jesus say that he is the bread of life, I was also reminded of this holy offering which was strategically placed before the glory of God in Israel's temple. So yes, it's true that Jesus is the bread that sustains life. And he is also, his life is also the bread of the presence that is continually offered to God. The compassion that he showed, the spiritual wisdom that he bestowed to other people, the way he uplifted folks and yet still held them accountable for their actions or for their lack of action. His willingness to go to the cross for the sake of love, for the sake of grace. In all of this, Jesus is a continual offering to God. He is the bread of the presence. That metaphor, with all of its imagery, was not lost when Jesus joined his disciples for his very last meal. At that supper, he took a loaf of bread and he passed it around the table to all of them, as you well know. And as he did that, he asked them to think about that bread as his very own body. And then he asked that each time they came together for the purpose of breaking bread, that they would remember him. And we remember him still as we participate in the ritual act of Holy Communion, the breaking of bread. We remember Jesus, the bread of life, broken for us. And we remember how his life was and how his life is a holy offering, the symbolic bread of the presence, continually surrendered to the glory of God. Sir, always give us that bread. Always feed us, Jesus. Always feed us with the food that we pant for, the sustenance that we are so desperate to consume. Give us this day our daily portion of bread, the bread of holy presence. Give us the bread of your life.